All right, welcome everyone to another deep dive. Today we're looking at a market that's absolutely essential,
Mm.
but you know, maybe not the most exciting thing you can think about, right? We're talking about bearings,
Yeah, bearings, not exactly the first thing that comes to mind when you think cutting-edge technology.
right? But what's fascinating about this is the numbers.
Oh, absolutely.
The sheer scale of this market in 2025, it's already huge.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about 148.62 billion US dollars.
It's massive, and you know what's even crazier? That number is expected to more than double
Wow.
by 2033
Yeah.
to $313.98 billion.
That is
That's a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR,
right. Aging
of
on
9.8%.
9.8%. That's serious growth.
Yeah, and that's not just a little blip. It's saying something about this market.
Definitely. So to get into the nitty-gritty of this, we've got a pretty hefty report to dig through.
Yeah, we do. We've been going through the Global Bearings Market Report 2025
Okay.
from Cognitive Market Research.
All right, cognitive market research. So this is what, a couple hundred pages?
Over 250, actually.
Wow. Okay, well,
Packed with data. And it's not just current data, it's giving us projections all the way to 2033.
right.
They've taken the 2024 figures, used those as a basis, and looked at the historical trends from 2021 to 2024
So we've got a good picture
to really map out where things are going.
of the past, present, and future.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's get into it. You mentioned this impressive growth.
Yeah.
What's the big story there? Why are we seeing this kind of expansion?
One of the most interesting things here is how directly this growth is tied to this massive trend of automation
Right.
we're seeing across so many industries.
Automation, right?
And the report really highlights this. The increasing adoption of industrial automation, robotics, all of that.
Mhm.
That's a core driver of this growth in the bearing market.
And that makes sense, right? If you've got all these
Yeah, think about it.
automated systems, robots, they need
More moving parts.
to move smoothly, reliably.
Exactly. And to do that, you need high-quality bearings.
So the more automation we have, the more bearings we need.
It's a fundamental link.
Okay, so that's the global picture.
Yeah.
What about different parts of the world?
All right, so if we zoom in a bit,
Where is all this action happening?
in 2025, the region with the biggest slice of the pie is North America.
Okay.
They're holding over 40% of the global market,
Wow, over 40%.
a market size of $54.99 billion.
Okay, so they're leading the pack, and are they expected to keep growing?
Oh, yeah, their CAGR is projected at 8.2%.
8.2%, that's pretty healthy.
It is.
Now, what about Europe? They're usually a big player in these things.
Absolutely. Europe comes in second place
Okay.
with over 30% of the market.
All right.
So that's $43.10 billion.
Okay. And their growth.
They're actually looking at a slightly faster growth rate, 8.8% CAGR.
Interesting. So Europe's catching up a bit. Now, where are we seeing the real, explosive growth?
Okay, so the region that's really exciting in terms of growth is the Asia-Pacific region.
APAC.
APAC, exactly.
They've been on the rise for a while now.
They have. In 2025, they represent about 23% of the global market.
Okay. Still a bit behind North America and Europe.
For now, their market size is $35.67 billion. But here's the kicker.
Yeah.
Their CAGR is a massive 12.6%.
Wow, that's way higher than
Significantly higher.
North America and Europe.
It is. They're the fastest growing region by a landslide.
No, APAC is the one to watch.
Definitely.
Okay, now what about the other regions? South America, the Middle East, Africa.
Right. So those are smaller markets right now.
Okay.
South America has a little over 5% of the market.
Okay.
The Middle East, about 2%.
Right.
And Africa, just around 1%.
Okay, so small but mighty.
Exactly. They are all showing really strong growth potential.
All right, let's hear it.
South America's CAGR is 10.5%.
Okay.
The Middle East is at 11.1%.
Wow, that's actually,
Pretty impressive.
yeah, pretty impressive.
And Africa, they're at 10.1%.
So even though they're starting smaller, they're growing really fast.
They are. There's a lot of opportunity there.
So we've got North America leading, Europe following closely, and APAC really surging ahead.
That's the big picture.
Now let's zoom in a little more.
All right, let's get granular.
Which countries are really driving these trends?
Okay, so in North America,
Yeah.
the USA is, of course, the biggest market.
Makes sense.
It's valued at $43.39 billion in 2025.
Okay.
And they're looking at a solid 8.0% CAGR.
Driven by.
Well, They've got a massive industrial base, and there's always that consistent demand from the automotive sector.
Right, lots of cars being made and driven.
Exactly.
What about Canada?
This is interesting. Canada is actually projected to have the fastest growth in North America.
Really? Faster than the U.S.?
Yeah, 9.0% CAGR.
Wow. Okay, and what's their market size?
$6.6 billion in 2025.
All right, so a good bit smaller, but
Yeah.
growing much faster.
It is, and it seems to be driven by that increase in automation and the growth in their automotive and aerospace sectors.
Interesting. So maybe some opportunities for businesses up north.
Definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay, now let's jump over to APAC. What's happening in that powerhouse region?
As you might expect, China is the giant there.
Oh,
Their market is valued at $14.98 billion in 2025.
it's huge.
Huge. And they've got a strong 12.1% CAGR.
Driven by.
Their massive industrial production, and again, that automotive sector just keeps growing.
Makes sense. Now, what about India? We talked about their impressive growth rate.
Right. India is the real standout in terms of percentage growth within APAC.
Okay.
Their market is smaller, $3.57 billion in 2025.
Okay.
But that projected CAGR of 14.5%.
That's incredible.
That's rapid growth, fueled by, rapid industrialization, expanding automotive and machinery sectors.
So India is the place to be if you're in the bearing business.
It's definitely a market with huge potential.
Now let's shift gears to Europe. What are the key players there?
Germany is the big one, as you might imagine.
Makes sense. They're an industrial powerhouse.
They are. Their market in 2025 is valued at $8.53 billion.
Okay, and their growth.
Solid 9.0% CAGR.
All right, and what's driving that?
They're leaders in automotive engineering.
Right.
And they're really embracing industrial automation.
So the usual suspects for Germany.
Pretty much.
What about the UK?
The UK is another significant market in Europe.
Okay.
They're at $7.24 billion in 2025.
All right, and they're growing.
At an even faster rate than Germany, 9.6% CAGR.
Okay, so they're holding their own.
They are strong manufacturing sector, advanced tech industries, and they're seeing a lot of growth in industrial applications.
So a good mix of factors driving their market.
It is.
Okay, so we've covered North America, Europe, and APAC. What about the other regions?
Right, we can't forget about them.
What are some of the key country-level insights there?
Okay, so in South America, Brazil is the leader.
Okay.
They've got a market size of $2.42 billion in 2025.
And their growth?
They're growing at a good clip, 11.1% CAGR.
Driven by?
It's mostly their strong industrial growth, and the demand from their automotive and manufacturing industries is increasing.
All right, makes sense. Now, what about the Middle East?
The key player in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
Their market is $2.09 billion in 2025.
Right.
And they're looking at an 11.4% CAGR.
Wow, that's pretty strong growth.
It is, and it seems to be coming from growth in their oil and gas, construction, and automotive sectors.
So kind of a mix of their traditional industries and some newer ones.
Exactly.
All right, and lastly, what about Africa?
South Africa is leading the pack in Africa.
Yep.
They've got a market size of $1.15 billion in 2025,
Yeah.
and they're growing at a solid 11.0% per CAGR.
And what's driving their growth?
Industrialization is a big factor,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a lot of infrastructure projects happening there.
Right, lots of building going on.
So that's creating a lot of demand for bearings.
Okay, so we've really gone around the world with this, and it's clear that
There's a lot going on.
different countries are at different stages,
Absolutely.
but there's growth pretty much everywhere.
It's a global story.
Okay, now let's dive into the bearings themselves.
All right, let's get technical.
What are the different types of bearings out there?
So the report breaks down the market by what they call product outlook. And the biggest share right now goes to ball bearings.
Okay, ball bearings. Those are the
England.
classic ones, right?
Yeah, they're the ones most people think of when they hear bearing.
And why are they so popular?
Well, they're incredibly versatile.
Yeah.
They're used in everything from cars to industrial machinery to aerospace.
So they're kind of the workhorse of the industry.
You could say that they're all about efficiency and durability.
And they've been around for a while. So the technology is pretty well established.
Exactly.
Okay, now the report also mentioned a fastest growing segment,
Right, that would be roller bearings.
roller bearings. Okay, so what's the difference between those and ball bearings? And why are they growing so fast?
Well, roller bearings are designed to handle higher loads, especially radial loads.
Got it.
So they're really good for heavy-duty applications.
Like?
Think about things like automotive, industrial machinery, heavy equipment, and they're becoming really important in the renewable energy sector.
Oh, interesting, like wind turbines and stuff.
Exactly. Wind turbines need bearings that can handle a lot of stress.
Right. Makes sense.
And another reason for their growth is that there's a lot of innovation happening in how they're made.
So new materials, new manufacturing techniques.
Yeah, things are constantly improving.
So even though ball bearings are the most common right now, roller bearings are kind of the up-and-comers.
They are. They're the ones to watch.
Okay, now what about the materials that these bearings are made from?
Right. So when we look at the material outlook,
Okay.
the dominant player right now is metal.
Okay, metal. Again, kind of the classic choice.
It is, and for good reason.
Yeah, why is that?
Metal is durable, it's strong, it's resistant to wear and tear.
And those are all pretty important qualities for bearings.
Absolutely, especially for the tough applications in automotive, industrial, and aerospace.
Now, what about the fastest growing segment in terms of materials?
That would be ceramic bearings.
Ceramic bearings. Okay, so those must have some unique advantages.
They do.
What are those?
Well, they're even more durable than metal bearings.
Wow. Okay, even more durable.
They also have incredibly low friction.
That's important for efficiency, right?
Exactly. Less friction means less energy wasted.
And what else?
They're very resistant to corrosion.
So they can handle harsh environments.
They can.
So where are we seeing these ceramic bearings being used?
They're becoming increasingly popular in emerging technologies like electric vehicles.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, electric vehicles need to be as efficient as possible.
Right, to maximize their range.
Exactly.
What else?
They're also being used in high-speed machinery.
Okay, so anything where you need things to spin really fast with minimal friction? And is there any specific reason why they're growing so fast?
Well, there's a lot of investment happening in sectors like aerospace, medical, and industrial automation. And those industries are really starting to see the benefits of ceramic bearings.
So it sounds like we're going to see more and more of those in the future.
It's a strong possibility.
All right, now let's move on to another way of classifying bearings. Mounted versus unmounted.
Okay, so this is all about how the bearings are integrated into a system.
Got it.
Mounted bearings, those are the ones that are already kind of packaged up and ready to go.
Okay.
They come with the housing and everything.
So they're easy to install.
Yeah, they're designed for ease of installation and alignment.
That makes sense. And what are the advantages of that?
Well, it makes things a lot simpler for industries where maintenance needs to be quick and easy.
Like what?
Think about manufacturing, mining, agriculture.
Okay, so places where downtime is really costly.
Exactly.
And what about the unmounted ones? They must offer some distinct advantages to justify their existence.
They do. They're actually the fastest growing type of bearing.
Really? Why is that?
Well, they give engineers more flexibility. They can design the housing and everything specifically for the application.
So it's more customizable.
It is, and that means you can get better performance.
And where are we seeing this growth in unmounted bearings?
It's closely tied to the rise of industrial automation and sophisticated machinery. And the automotive industry is also adopting them more and more.
For things like?
Well, they're always looking for ways to improve performance and reduce maintenance.
Right. Makes sense.
And unmounted bearings can help with that.
Now, the report also briefly mentioned some of the key components of bearings, like balls and cages. Yeah. Are there any interesting trends within those segments?
Oh, absolutely. So first off, we've got balls, which are pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, they're kind of the heart of the bearing, right?
They are. They're the things that actually roll and reduce friction.
And, as you might expect, they dominate the market.
They do. They're essential for pretty much every type of bearing.
So no surprises there. What about cages?
Cages are actually the fastest growing component segment.
Really? Why is that?
Well, cages are what hold the balls in place.
Right.
And as bearings get more sophisticated, the demands on cages increase.
So they need to be more durable.
Exactly. They need to be able to withstand higher speeds, heavier loads, all of that.
And how are manufacturers achieving that?
They're turning to advanced materials like polyamide and composites.
So kind of like the same trend we're seeing with the bearings themselves.
It is. Innovation is happening at every level.
Okay, so we talked about the different types of bearings, the materials they're made from, even the components that go into them. Now let's talk about where all these bearings are actually used.
All right, let's look at the applications.
What are the main industries that rely on these things?
The biggest one, by far, is the automotive industry.
Okay, that makes sense. Cars need a lot of bearings, right?
They do. Every wheel needs bearings, the engine needs bearings, the transmission needs bearings.
It's kind of a no-brainer that they're the biggest consumer.
It is, and with the growth of electric vehicles, that demand is only going to increase.
Right. EVs need bearings too.
They do, and they often need specialized bearings that are designed for the unique demands of electric powertrains.
So that's a whole other segment of the market that's emerging.
It is.
Now, what about the fastest growing application area?
That would be construction.
Construction. Interesting. So not just cars, but also buildings and infrastructure.
Exactly. Think about all the heavy machinery that's used in construction.
Cranes, excavators, that sort of thing.
All of that, and they all need bearings that can handle heavy loads and tough conditions.
And is there any particular reason why construction is growing so fast?
Well, there's a lot of infrastructure development happening around the world,
Mm-hmm.
especially in emerging economies.
So as those economies grow, they need to build more roads, more bridges, more buildings.
Exactly, and that translates into more demand for bearings.
And on top of that, you've got the trend of urbanization.
Right, more and more people are moving to cities.
So even more construction is needed to accommodate them.
It all adds up.
Okay, so we've got automotive and construction as the big players.
Yeah.
What are some of the other industries where bearings are essential?
Well, you've got aerospace. That's a big one.
Right. Planes need bearings for their engines and all their moving parts.
They do. And then there's power transmission.
So, like generating and distributing electricity.
Exactly. All those turbines and generators rely on bearings.
And what else?
Oil and gas extraction and processing.
Okay, so kind of the heavy industries.
They are. And then there's agriculture.
Right. Farm equipment needs bearings too.
It does. And finally, there's a broad category that the report calls other industrial equipment.
And what does that include?
Things like robotics, manufacturing machinery, all sorts of automated systems.
So basically anything that involves moving parts in an industrial setting. All right, so we've got a good sense of where all these bearings are being used. Now, how do they actually get from the manufacturers to the end users? What are the main distribution channels in this market?
The report breaks it down into two main channels, offline and online.
Okay, so kind of the traditional way and the more modern way.
You could say that.
And which one is dominant right now?
Offline still holds the majority share.
Okay, and why is that?
Well, a lot of the buyers in this market are industrial companies. And they often prefer to buy directly from distributors and manufacturers.
Especially if they're buying in bulk, right?
Exactly. They want to make sure they're getting authentic products and that they have access to good technical support.
So it's kind of about trust and reliability.
It is.
And those relationships are often built up over time through those offline channels.
Exactly. There's a lot of value in this personal connections.
Now, what about the online channel? Is it gaining ground?
It is. It's actually the fastest growing distribution segment.
Interesting. So even in a market like this, where trust and relationships are so important, online is making inroads.
It is, and there are a few reasons for that.
Okay, what are they?
Well, first of all, e-commerce platforms and manufacturers' websites are making it easier than ever to find and compare products.
So more transparency and convenience.
Exactly, and then there's the convenience of online ordering.
Right, you can place a bulk order from anywhere in the world with a few clicks.
You can, and often the delivery times are faster.
So it's more efficient?
It is.
And I imagine price is a factor too.
Oh, absolutely. Online retailers often offer competitive pricing and discounts.
So there are definitely some advantages to going online, even for industrial buyers.
There are.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at the different types of bearings, the materials they're made from, the industries they're used in, even the distribution channels. Now let's step back and look at the big picture. What are the main forces that are shaping this market?
Okay, so the report identifies a few key drivers, restraints, and trends.
All right, let's start with the drivers. What's pushing this market forward?
Well, we've already touched on some of them.
Like
Growing adoption of electric vehicles.
right, that's a big one.
It is. And then there's the expansion of the construction and mining sectors worldwide.
As countries develop and populations grow, they need to build more stuff.
Exactly. And that requires a lot of heavy machinery, which means a lot of bearings.
And what else?
The growth of the renewable energy sector.
Right, wind turbines and all that.
They all need bearings.
So those are the main forces driving the growth of the market. What about the restraints? What are some of the challenges that the industry is facing?
One of the biggest challenges is the lack of skilled labor.
Oh, interesting. So even though we're talking about a high-tech industry, it still relies on people with specialized skills.
It does, and there's a shortage of technicians who are qualified to install and maintain these sophisticated bearings.
So that could potentially slow down growth in some areas.
It could.
What else?
Another challenge is the presence of counterfeit bearings.
Oh, right. That's a problem in a lot of industries.
It is, and it's particularly concerning in the bearing market because a faulty bearing can have serious consequences.
Right. It could lead to equipment failure, downtime, even safety hazards.
Exactly.
So manufacturers and distributors are really cracking down on counterfeiting.
They are. It's a major priority.
Okay, now what about the trends? What are some of the things that are shaping the future of the bearing market?
There are a couple of really interesting trends to watch.
Okay, let's hear.
First of all, as we've already discussed, the growth of electric vehicles is going to have a huge impact on the bearing market.
Right. They need specialized bearings.
They do, and as EV production ramps up, the demand for those bearings is going to skyrocket.
So that's definitely something to watch.
It is
What's the other trend?
smart bearings.
Smart bearings. Okay, tell me more about those.
So these are bearings that have sensors and other electronics built into them.
What's the purpose of that?
Well, those sensors can monitor things like temperature, vibration, and lubrication levels.
Okay.
And that data can be transmitted wirelessly to a central system.
So it's like giving the bearings a voice.
It is. They can tell you how they're doing.
And what's the benefit of that?
Well, it allows for predictive maintenance.
Oh, interesting. So instead of waiting for a bearing to fail, you can identify potential problems early on.
Exactly, and that can save a lot of time and money.
It can also prevent accidents, right?
It can. If you know a bearing is about to fail, you can replace it before it causes any damage.
So smart bearings are kind of a game changer.
They are. They're really changing the way people think about bearing maintenance.
And is this something that's already happening, or is it more of a future trend?
It's already starting to happen.
Okay, are there any specific examples in the report?
Yeah, the report actually mentions a couple of recent innovations.
Okay, tell me about those.
One is UE Systems On-Track Wireless System.
And what does that do?
It's a system for autonomous bearing health monitoring.
So it basically uses sensors and wireless technology to keep tabs on the bearings.
Exactly. And it can alert you if there's a problem.
And when did this system come out?
They launched it in December of 2023.
Okay, so it's pretty new.
It is.
What's the other innovation?
That would be NSK Ltd's new low-friction hub unit bearing.
Okay, and what's special about that?
Well, it reduces friction by 40% compared to their previous models.
Wow, 40%. That's a huge improvement.
It is, and it also has better resistance to muddy water.
So it's more durable.
It is, and that's especially important for electric vehicles.
Right, because it can help extend their range.
Exactly. And when did this bearing come out?
They announced it in September of 2024. So both of these innovations are very recent.
They are. It shows that the industry is really focused on innovation.
Yeah, it's exciting to see these kinds of advancements happening, even in a seemingly mature technology like bearings.
It is. It just goes to show that there's always room for improvement.
Okay, so we've talked about the drivers, the restraints, and the trends. Now let's talk about the players. Who are the major companies in the bearing market?
Well, it's a pretty competitive market.
Okay.
There are a number of big global players.
Can you leave a few?
Sure, you've got companies like SKF, Schaeffler, NSK, Timken, JTEC-T, NTN.
So these are the big names.
They are, and they're all constantly innovating.
Okay.
They're investing in new materials, new designs, new manufacturing techniques.
And they're also competing on things like price and distribution, right?
They are. It's a very dynamic market.
So what does the future hold for the bearing market?
Well, it's definitely a market with a lot of potential.
Okay.
The demand for bearings is only going to increase as the world becomes more automated, more electrified, and more industrialized.
So for anyone who's thinking about investing in this market, now is a good time.
It's a good time to be paying attention.
All right, so to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways from our deep dive into the global bearing market?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that this is a market that's much more dynamic and exciting than it might seem at first glance.
Right, it's not just about little metal balls.
It's not. It's a market that's being driven by some of the biggest trends in the global economy.
And it's a market that's ripe for innovation.
Absolutely. There are a lot of opportunities for companies that are willing to invest in new technologies and new ideas.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've learned a lot about a market that I honestly didn't know that much about before.
It's been a pleasure.
And on that note, here's a thought for our listeners. We've seen how something as seemingly simple as a bearing can be at the heart of so much technological advancement.
Mm.
So, what other everyday objects might be undergoing similar transformations behind the scenes? It's worth thinking about the hidden innovations that are shaping our world.
It is. It's all around us.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.